The roar of bulldozers threatens to erase a centuries-old legacy. A lone woman stands against a ruthless order, but will her final piece of evidence be enough to save everything? Don't miss what happens next in this unyielding fight. You won't believe the lengths she goes to protect her heritage. The growl of the bulldozer was an obscenity in the crisp Charleston morning air, a brutal sound that ripped through the genteel quiet of Abigail Stone's 50-acre property. At 50, Abigail possessed the wiry strength and sun-weathered skin of a woman who'd spent a lifetime working outdoors, her lineage tracing back to some of South Carolina's most esteemed horse breeders. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds, narrowed as she watched the yellow beast inch closer to the historic stables, the heart of her family's legacy. "Mr. Turner, I'm warning you, one more foot and that's trespassing." Abigail's voice, though strained, carried the authority of generations who had commanded respect in these parts. Mike Turner, a man whose 40 years had seemingly been spent cultivating an air of smug self-importance, merely smirked from beside the machine. He was the newly elected mouthpiece of the Home Owners Association, a body Abigail had reluctantly become part of when a sliver of her ancestral land had been rezoned and encroached upon by a sprawling new development of cookie-cutter mansions. He held a sheaf of papers aloft, the official HOA order to demolish the unsightly and dilapidated structure that was her stables. "Mrs. Stone, the HOA has spoken. This eyesore," he gestured dismissively at the stables, their aged cypress wood gleaming softly in the morning light, "is a blight on our community's aesthetic. It's coming down. Today." The stables weren't just a structure, they were a sanctuary, a living monument. Within their walls, the scent of hay, old leather, and champion horses still lingered. This was where her grandfather had trained Charleston Charm, the legendary colt that had defied all odds to win the Triple Crown in 1958, a feat that had etched the Stone name into the annals of American racing history. The thought of its destruction was a physical ache in Abigail's chest. "This stable is a piece of history. Turner, it's a landmark," she retorted, her hands clenching. Several of her prized thoroughbreds, sensing the tension, whinnied nervously from the adjacent paddock. "It's a pile of old wood." "Mrs. Stone," Turner said, his voice dripping with condescension, "and according to Section 4, Subsection B of the HOA bylaws, which you agreed to, we have the right to remove any structure deemed detrimental to property values." He signaled to the bulldozer operator, a burly man with an impassive face. The engine roared louder. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Abigail's resolve. They were actually going to do it. These people, who valued manicured lawns and beige uniformity over history and heart, were about to pulverize her heritage. You can't," she stammered, moving to stand directly into the bulldozer's path. It wasn't a calculated act of bravery, but a raw, instinctual response to protect what was hers, what was sacred. Turner's eyes flickered with annoyance. "Don't be a fool. Abigail, get out of the way. We have the paperwork, the legal right." "Legal right," Abigail's voice rose, fueled by a sudden surge of indignation. "What about the moral right? What about the history that this land, these stables, represent? Does your precious HOA even know that a Triple Crown winner was trained right here?" Turner scoffed. "Ancient history, Mrs. Stone, means nothing to the current property values. Now, are you going to move, or do we have to have you removed?" He made a subtle gesture, and two uniformed security guards, hired by the HOA for this very occasion, stepped forward. The air crackled with confrontation. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the tense scene. Abigail stood her ground, her gaze unwavering, a lone woman against the inexorable march of what Turner and his ilk called progress. The problem wasn't just beginning, it had crashed onto her doorstep with the destructive force of a bulldozer, threatening to obliterate not just wood and nails, but the very soul of her family's existence in Charleston. This was more than a dispute over property, it was a battle for the preservation of a legacy, and Abigail knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was a fight she could not afford to lose. The main problem had unfurled in all its ugly immediacy. The HOA was not merely suggesting or requesting, they were enforcing, with brute machinery and a chilling disregard for anything but their own narrow definition of community standards. The order wasn't just for demolition, it was an eviction notice for her beloved horses too, an unthinkable prospect. The standoff at the stables sent ripples of unease through the usually tranquil Charleston equestrian community and even into the wider city. News, fueled by a few hastily snapped photos from a curious neighbor, trickled onto local social media feeds, painting Abigail as either a stubborn obstructionist or a beleaguered hero, depending on the commentator. The immediate impact on Abigail was a gnawing anxiety that settled deep in her stomach, a constant companion to the simmering anger. The bulldozer had retreated for the day, a temporary reprieve bought by her sheer defiance and the arrival of a local news reporter alerted by one of Abigail's frantic calls. But the threat remained, hanging like a guillotine blade. Her horses, sensitive creatures, mirrored her distress. They were restless in their stalls, their usual calm replaced by an edgy skittishness. Even General's Pride, her oldest stallion, a descendant of Charleston charm, seemed to sense the encroaching danger, his ears perpetually swiveling, his powerful frame tense. Abigail spent her days making frantic calls, to lawyers, to historical societies, to anyone she thought might listen or help. Most offered sympathy but little concrete assistance. The HOA, it seemed, had a formidable legal standing based on the bylaws she'd inadvertently signed. The surrounding community, the new affluent residents of the Magnolia Creek Estates development, were largely indifferent or openly hostile. They had bought into a vision of pristine, modern living, and Abigail's rambling, historic property, however beautiful to some, was an anomaly, a stubborn holdout against their curated aesthetic. Whispers followed her when she made rare trips to the local feed store. That's her, the crazy horse woman, thinks she's above the rules. The isolation was a heavy cloak. It was Helen Carter, the 67-year-old director of the South Carolina Racing Heritage Association, who provided the first glimmer of hope, though it was wrapped in a sobering reality. Helen, a woman whose southern grace was matched only by her steely determination, arrived at Abigail's farm a few days after the initial confrontation. Her face was etched with concern as she surveyed the stables. "Abigail, my dear," Helen began, her voice a soothing balm. "This is a travesty. Those stables, they've seen more history than all those new houses combined." She ran a reverent hand over a stall door, its wood smoothed by countless hands and the nuzzling of equine champions. But Turner and his HOA, they're playing by a rule book, however soulless. We need more than just sentiment to fight this. "I know, Helen, I know." Abigail sighed, the weight of her struggle evident in her slumped shoulders. "My grandfather's journals. They mention Charleston Charm's training regime, the special feed mix he developed right here. But are old papers enough?" Helen's eyes lit up. "Journals, Abigail, those could be invaluable. But we need something undeniable, something that screams national treasure." She paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her features. "There was always a rumor, a whisper among the old-timers, about your grandfather and Charleston charm, something beyond just the win, something about a specific artifact, a symbol of that victory, kept here." Abigail frowned, searching her memory. Her grandfather had been a private man, not prone to grand pronouncements. He'd celebrated the Triple Crown win, of course, but quietly, with his family and his horses. An artifact. He had the trophies, the winner's blankets. They're in the main house. Safe. No, not those. Helen pressed gently. Something more, integral to the stables themselves. Something that proves this exact structure was pivotal. Think, Abigail, did he ever show you anything special? Something he considered a lucky charm, or a cornerstone of his success, tied to this place? The days that followed were a blur of anxious waiting and desperate searching. Abigail pored over her grandfather's meticulous journals, page after yellowed page filled with his neat, spidery script. She found detailed accounts of Charleston Charm's diet, his exercise routines, his quirks and strengths. She found poignant entries about the bond between man and horse, the hopes and dreams riding on that singular colt. But there was no mention of a hidden artifact, no clue to the undeniable proof Helen believed was their only chance. The twist, when it came, wasn't a discovery, but an escalation from Turner. A new certified letter arrived, more aggressive in tone. The HOA, emboldened by their legal counsel and impatient with the delay, had filed for an expedited demolition order with the local magistrate, citing safety concerns due to the stable's age and Abigail's uncooperative stance. They also included a thinly veiled threat if the horses weren't removed voluntarily within 72 hours. The HOA would arrange for animal control to impound them. Citing potential endangerment due to the impending demolition, the world tilted. The thought of her horses, her family, being seized by strangers, handled by potentially unsympathetic hands, loaded into trailers and taken away. It was a violation far deeper than the destruction of wood and stone. It was an attack on the living, breathing extension of her legacy. This new threat bypassed the historical argument, aiming straight for Abigail's heart, her love for her animals. The problem had just morphed from a fight to save a building into a desperate race to save her horses from confiscation, all while the clock ticked relentlessly towards the stable's destruction. The pressure intensified tenfold, pushing Abigail to the brink. Where could she possibly find irrefutable proof under such a crushing deadline? The 72-hour ultimatum was a vice, tightening with every passing second. Sleep became a forgotten luxury as Abigail, fueled by coffee and a desperate, feral energy, ransacked her family home in the stables. She was no longer just looking for a sentimental keepsake. She was hunting for a silver bullet, a legal lifeline. Her grandfather's journals, previously a source of nostalgic connection, now felt like a cryptic puzzle she couldn't crack. She reread passages about Charleston Charm, her eyes straining in the dim lamplight, searching for any coded message, any oblique reference Helen's words might have hinted at. The stables themselves, each plank and beam, were subjected to her frantic scrutiny. She tapped on walls, lifted loose floorboards, her hands raw and grimy. Helen Carter, true to her word, didn't abandon Abigail. She spent hours at the local Historical Society archives and the city planning department, her network of contacts buzzing. "They're trying to bury you in bureaucracy." "Abigail," Helen reported grimly over the phone, her voice crackling with static and indignation. "Turner's pulled strings. He's claiming the stables are structurally unsound, a public hazard. It's a lie, of course, but a lie on official paper is a powerful weapon." The community's division deepened. A small but vocal group of older Charlestonians, who remembered the Stone family's contributions in the glory of Charleston Charm, began to rally. Letters to the editor appeared in the local paper, decrying the HOA's heavy-handedness. A young, idealistic lawyer, fresh out of law school and eager to make a name for herself, offered Abigail pro bono assistance after reading about her plight online, though she warned that an injunction against the HOA would be an uphill battle without concrete new evidence. The weight of her ancestors seemed to press down on Abigail. She wasn't just fighting for herself, but for generations of Stones who had poured their lives into this land and these horses. The thought of failing them, of being the one to let the legacy crumble, was an unbearable torment. On the second night, with less than 24 hours remaining before animal control was scheduled to arrive, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She sat on an overturned bucket in the dimly lit aisle of the stables. The scent of old hay and impending loss thick in the air. General's pride nudged her shoulder gently, his warm breath a small comfort in the oppressive gloom. "Oh, Grandpa," she whispered into the stallion's mane, tears finally tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. "What did you hide?" Where is it her gaze fell upon a section of the main support beam in Charleston Charm's old stall, a massive piece of heart pine that had withstood over a century of seasons. It was darker than the surrounding wood, almost blackened with age and countless coats of linseed oil. She'd run her hands over it 1,000 times. But now, in her desperation, she saw something she'd never noticed before, a faint, almost imperceptible irregularity near the base, just above the packed earth floor. It wasn't a crack or a knot. It looked almost like a seam. Her heart hammered. With trembling fingers, she scraped away a century's accumulation of grime and ancient whitewash. There, cleverly recessed and perfectly camouflaged, was a small, tightly fitted wooden panel, no bigger than her hand. It was so artfully concealed that only someone looking for the impossible, or someone guided by a desperate hope, might have found it. With a rusty pry bar she'd found in the tack room, Abigail carefully, painstakingly, worked the panel loose. It came away with a soft groan of protest, revealing a small, hollowed-out cavity within the mighty beam. And nestled inside, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a faded leather thong, was a small, surprisingly heavy object in a folded piece of parchment. Her hand shook so violently she could barely untie the thong. Inside, the oilcloth was not a trophy or a jewel, but a horseshoe, a racing plate, to be exact, clearly worn but meticulously preserved. It was smaller than modern racing plates, clearly of a vintage design. The parchment, brittle with age, contained a short, handwritten note from her grandfather, dated the day after Charleston Charm's Triple Crown victory. This plate, from his right fore, carried Charlie across the wire to glory 3 times. It was his heart, and the heart of this stable, that achieved the impossible. May this place always remember the spirit of a true champion. May it stand as long as that spirit endures. And then, crucially, below his signature was another smaller inscription, officially surveyed and commemorated. June 10th, 1958, as a site of significant sporting achievement by the National Racing Heritage Foundation, followed by a reference number. A choked sob escaped Abigail. This wasn't just a sentimental token. This was it. The horseshoe was tangible proof of Charleston Charm's connection to this very stall. The note, with its reference to an official commemoration by a national foundation, was the key. If such a designation existed, it would elevate the stables beyond the petty reach of HOA bylaws. It would make them, as she had instinctively known all along, a recognized piece of American sporting heritage. A surge of adrenaline, potent and fierce, banished her exhaustion. This was the hidden truth, the shift in power she had prayed for. Turner and his HOA had dismissed her claims of history as mere sentiment. Now she had something far more potent. She immediately called Helen, her voice hoarse but triumphant. "Helen, I found it. I found what Grandpa left. It's more than we hoped." As the first rays of dawn crept over Charleston, casting long shadows across the dew-kissed grass, Abigail Stone was no longer just a beleaguered horse trainer. She was armed. The official notice from the National Racing Heritage Foundation, if it could be located and verified in time, would be her shield and her sword. The fight was far from over, but the balance had undeniably tipped. The revelation within the ancient beam had given her not just evidence, but a renewed, unshakable resolve. The looming threat of the bulldozers and animal control suddenly seemed less insurmountable. She had a weapon now, forged in history and love. The dawn that broke over Charleston carried not just the promise of a new day, but the urgent thrum of a race against time. While Abigail, armed with the precious horseshoe and her grandfather's note, felt a surge of renewed strength. The 72-hour deadline was mere hours from expiring. Helen Carter, galvanized by the discovery, was a whirlwind of activity. Her first call, made before the sun had even fully risen, was to a sleepy but influential contact on the board of the National Racing Heritage Foundation. The reference number from the parchment was the golden ticket. "They're digging." Abigail Helen's voice, usually so composed, crackled with excitement over the phone line an hour later. The archives are pre-digital for that era, but they have a team manually searching. The current director is intrigued. He said the foundation did make a number of such living landmark designations in the post-war era, Jamaica, often for smaller, private facilities that had produced extraordinary champions. It was a program to preserve the grassroots of the sport. Meanwhile, Abigail wasn't idle. She contacted the young lawyer, relaying the new evidence. The lawyer, initially cautious, felt a spark of genuine optimism. This changes things. Mrs. Stone, an official heritage designation, if confirmed, could provide grounds for an immediate federal injunction against any demolition. HOA bylaws cannot supersede federal or nationally recognized heritage status. The clock, however, was a relentless adversary. At precisely 800 a.m., the ominous rumble of heavy machinery once again disturbed the peace of Abigail's property. Mike Turner was back, a smug, anticipatory glint in his eyes. He was flanked not only by the bulldozer and its impassive operator, but also by 2 Charleston County animal control vans. "Time's up." "Mrs. Stone," Turner announced, his voice loud and officious, clearly intended to project authority. "The magistrate's expedited order is in effect. Remove your animals, or we will." He gestured towards the animal control officers, who began to approach the paddock, tranquilizer guns visible. Abigail stepped forward, her stance unwavering. In her hand, she held the oilcloth-wrapped horseshoe and the parchment. "Not so fast. Mr. Turner, it seems you've overlooked a rather crucial detail about the heritage of this property." Turner scoffed. "Oh, here we go again with the sentimental claptrap. I told you, ancient history doesn't cut it. This isn't sentiment." "Mr. Turner," Abigail stated, her voice clear and carrying, "this is official recognition. These stables, this very structure, were designated a site of significant sporting achievement by the National Racing Heritage Foundation on June 10, 1958. She held up the parchment. "I have my grandfather's contemporaneous note and, more importantly, the foundation is currently verifying the official record from their archives based on this reference number." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Turner's face, quickly masked by bravado. "A piece of old paper. That's your grand defense. The HOA's legal standing is firm." Just then, Abigail's phone rang. It was Helen. "They found it, Abigail. They found it. An official registered National Sporting Heritage Landmark Certificate, number 47B. They're faxing the confirmation to your lawyer in the city planning office right now. The director himself is issuing a statement." A slow smile spread across Abigail's face. She looked directly at Turner, whose smirk was beginning to falter as he registered the change in her demeanor. "Mr. Turner, it appears your information is out of date. As of this moment, any attempt to demolish this stable or remove these horses would not just be a violation of my property rights, but potentially an act of vandalism against a recognized national heritage site. I believe your expedited order just met a rather significant roadblock." The young lawyer, who had arrived unnoticed during the exchange, stepped forward, her phone displaying a freshly received email. "That's correct. Mr. Turner, I have just received confirmation from the National Racing Heritage Foundation. Stone stables are indeed a protected landmark. Any action taken against them is now subject to federal review. I'd advise your bulldozer operator to turn off his engine." The air went still. The bulldozer's growl died down. The animal control officers paused, looking uncertainly between Turner and the lawyer. Turner's face, moments before a mask of arrogant confidence, was now a mottled red. He stammered, This is an outrage, an obscure, forgotten. It means nothing. It means everything, Mr. Turner," Abigail said, her voice quiet but firm. "It means history matters. It means legacy endures." The hero's rise was swift and decisive. News of the last-minute reprieve, the dramatic unveiling of the stable's true status, spread like wildfire. The HOA's case collapsed. Turner, exposed as an overzealous bully who had almost sanctioned the destruction of a national treasure, found himself facing the ire not just of Abigail, but of a significant portion of the Charleston community, including many of the Magnolia Creek Estates residents who now saw the stables in a new, more respectful light. He was quietly removed from his position on the HOA board within weeks. Abigail, with her lawyer's skillful guidance, didn't just save her stables. She launched a countersuit against the HOA. The court battle was considerably shorter and less fraught than her initial struggle. The evidence was overwhelmingly in her favor. The judge, a history enthusiast herself, not only ruled for the permanent protection of Stone stables, but also awarded Abigail substantial damages for emotional distress, defamation, and the attempted illegal destruction of property. The HOA was also mandated to contribute to a fund for the stable's restoration and upkeep, turning their attempt to remove an eyesore into a responsibility to preserve a landmark. In the months that followed, Stone stables underwent a careful restoration, funded by the settlement and donations from heritage groups and newly enthusiastic locals. The aged cypress wood was treated and preserved, the stalls refurbished, and a discreet bronze plaque was mounted near Charleston Charm's stall, detailing its history and its Triple Crown victory, and the dramatic fight to save it in 2012. Abigail Stone, no longer just a horse trainer, but a guardian of history, found a new purpose. She continued to train horses, her spirit and that of her ancestors imbued in every gallop. The stables became a place of pilgrimage for racing enthusiasts and a point of pride for Charleston. Helen Carter often visited, the two women sharing stories and tea in the shade of the ancient oaks, the nervous whinnies of thoroughbreds a constant, reassuring soundtrack. The villain had fallen, his attempt to erase history thwarted by the very history he sought to deny. Abigail had not only protected her home and her horses, but had ensured that the legacy of Charleston Charm and the quiet dedication of generations of the Stone family would continue to inspire. The satisfying clang of a farrier's hammer on new steel shoes echoed from the restored stables, a testament to resilience, to the enduring power of heritage, and to a victory hard won against the odds. The fight had been brutal, but the peace that settled over Stone stables was profound and lasting. From the brink of demolition, the Stone family legacy and the spirit of a Triple Crown champion were saved by Abigail's unshakable resolve, a reminder that history and heart can triumph over cold regulations. Thank you for watching this dramatic journey. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.